Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Horizon. I can only hope I'm visible because StreamYard seems to think I am. And I've just glanced at the video on YouTube and it seems like I'm visible. So hopefully I'm both audible and visible. And hopefully Old Media Guy will return soon because we've been having a chat in the green room before we went on air. And he's definitely around. And it's difficult for me to talk to myself, believe it or not, although I know I'm doing that right now. Again, if I cough from time to time, it is because I'm still just getting over the cold, but I'm most of the way out of that now, thankfully.
Hello.
Brilliant. I was just about to mention your name. You're like the shopkeeper, Mr. Ben.
Yeah, sorry about that. My dog gave me that look that said, "I'd like to eat now."
Well, coincidentally,
Please,
just
sir,
before
I want some more. Okay, I'm gonna be
just before I
late.
started, the kitten jumped on the table behind the laptop, and I was just waiting for it to just disconnect everything. But the fact you can hear me clearly means that it has not disconnected anything, which is always a bonus. I see Darren M is in the chat. I'm going to unceremoniously dump this one on my lap so I can see it better. We have Darren M, hello, and Words and Pictures, and the Soda Engine. My goodness, it's everyone looking and sounding good. Thank you. I feel you're being too kind.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So we had a brief discussion before coming on, the one that I have nothing prepared in terms of actual notes from the last video. I mean, I made the video. Do I need notes?
I don't know. Do you?
I don't know. I mean, technically, when I say I made the video, I made the little bit around somebody else's video because that was obviously BBC's Horizon, Atlantis Reborn. Did you know they made that video twice?
Really?
Yes. It's a funny story, hilarious story. So when it was first broadcast, it was broadcast as Atlantis Reborn, which is the title I used. You may have noticed when it ran that it said Atlantis Reborn again.
Okay.
Now, the
Keep
reason
going.
for that
Don't keep us in suspense here. We're just hanging on your words.
The reason it has a double title is because it was remade. Graham Hancock complained to the BBC saying that it was unfair and unjust what they'd done. And so there was no legal obligation for them to do it. But the Horizon team decided, okay, fine, you've made a complaint. And I think the BBC actually upheld the complaint. And so they said, right, fine, we'll remake it. And the one you've seen, Atlantis Reborn Again, is their remade version. Now, I saw the original version, and I'm damned if I can remember what the differences are because I don't think it made. I don't think you can do anything to make Hancock's arguments look any better.
Yeah, I actually thought it wasn't a hit piece, that they were actually handling it decently well.
Yeah.
And this version, I think the worst he could complain about was they kept bringing up people who disagreed with him, and his counter argument sounded silly in comparison. Because really,
Yeah.
that's the weakness of his argument is for a layperson is most obvious there when someone comes along and says, "Well, I went to the site and I saw this, this, and that, and
Yeah.
what I saw was very consistent with a natural sandstone formation." And Hancock's response is, "Well, he needs to dive 45 more times before he sees
Yeah.
it." Like, well, then
I
what's the
know.
point of having a degree in geology or underwater geology if you have to
Yes.
keep diving until the non-expert says you've done enough?
Exactly.
You
Now
know,
you're
I mean,
digging
and
in it.
maybe he had more of a point to that. Like maybe what he was getting at was he dove in the wrong places. Okay, that's a legitimate argument. But to say
Maybe.
50 more times, I don't
I
know
know.
why he said that.
And those 4 to 8 original dives were all with Hancock, so he couldn't have been in the wrong place unless Hancock took him to
Yes.
the wrong place.
Yes.
You have not jogged my memory a bit. Maybe there were just more of those somewhat peevish, childish outbursts from Hancock in the original version, where he was going, "I don't care. Oh, there's not enough dives." Maybe there's just more of that in the original one, and they cut some of that out for the reborn version.
It could very well be. His presentation on the last presentation he made on Joe Rogan was very well done.
Yeah.
He wasn't all that peevish. He may have been slightly irritated, but that's who isn't. The
Didn't he?
evidence he showed was pretty good.
Yeah.
Not not his big picture idea that there was some sort of Atlantean civilization. He kind of snuck that in there, but it wasn't the main point. It was simply, here's the evidence of what the mainstream people are overlooking.
Well, he wouldn't have
And,
he wouldn't have called it Atlantis because he doesn't want to be thought of as a crackpot.
right, but he said things like, now we see in the Badlands here in eastern Washington this evidence of destruction that we know did not take millions of years. And that, okay, so backing up just a bit, we know
Mm-hmm.
that mainstream archaeology will suppress evidence. We know this for a couple of reasons. One is they've insisted for how many generations that human beings came to North America 13,000 years ago, and anyone who said otherwise was basically cut out of the profession. They were canceled. And there's been
Right.
more and more evidence accumulating that there were several waves of migration, and the migration 13,000 odd years ago was one of the last major migrations, if I remember it, until the 16th century when Europeans came over.
I will have to look that up. If there were ones earlier than
Yes, it's
13,000.
the pre-Clovis hypothesis was considered so toxic that you would basically not get funding if you considered it seriously. And that's why some people say that science proceeds one funeral at a time. You
Right. I
have
need
to
to.
wait
I
for
need to
some of
make.
these bigwigs with a great reputation to die off before you can say, you know what, I did find something at the 15,000 year level,
You're going to
and
make me
so on.
go look stuff up because you're ringing bells in my head. I think I have seen recent documentaries by actual archaeologists, as far as I can see, talking
So,
about the progression of migrations into North America.
right.
So I will need to find that and see if there are earlier ones than 13,000
So
mentioned
that's
in that.
one thing that we know that the mainstream scientists have suppressed. And again, it's not all of
Have
them,
they
and it's not
suppressed
the
it?
younger ones. It's the older ones saying, you're not going to overturn my theories now, are you?
Yeah.
And that happens in any field. So this is not a specific conspiracy, it's human
Yeah.
nature. So that's one instance. Another instance is, for a long time, people have been saying the Grand Canyon could have been formed through quick geological processes instead of long processes that take millions of years. And the standard response to that is, oh, you must be a creationist. Well, shutting somebody down with a new idea by calling them a creationist, that how is that science? That sounds to me like a personal attack. Um,
Now
Go
that
ahead.
kind of backlash, that kind of fell out of favor in the last 50 years. I mean, that's people being catastrophists, and then that was going on, and that went out the window to gradual progression of change,
Yes, I
and that
personally am
kind of
not a
got
gradualist. I am a catastrophist
yeah, but
because
that's well old. I mean, the fact that people know about how the Badlands were formed, they know about dams breaking, and they've known about this for about 50 years. So, I mean, your concept of people holding back science for uh, dislike of certain concepts is true, but also about several decades out of date as well.
yes and no, because for reasons I shall not get into,
Mhm.
I was dealing with people on the scientific fringes in the 80s and 90s, and I heard
Uh-huh.
how the arguments against them were basically gradualist arguments. That of
Right.
course it didn't have. Of course the Grand Canyon wasn't formed very quickly. Of course the Badlands and Washingtons weren't formed very quickly. We know because of evolution. Dot dot dot. And
Mm.
evolution became this catch-all argument to the point where it explained everything and nothing, which is how you get people like David Berlinski writing in the 90s, not claiming creationism is correct, but simply saying, based on your arguments, you're wrong because you have these
I have to
logical
find so
contradictions and
many
so on and so forth. And he stirred up a
videos on this
lot of,
now.
yeah, he stirred up a lot of dust by saying your arguments are wrong. And then you had other people just fire back, well, you're just a creationist. And that
Hmm.
drove a lot of people that I was associated with away from science altogether, and probably drove many other people out. And
Yeah.
that's when the Graham Hancock swoop in, because there's a void there to explain what happened before this, what brought us to here, what's the history we might have forgotten and have yet to uncover.
That's
And as
true.
soon as you
Driving
get
out.
called names for
Yeah.
saying something that might be a little bit out there, you are right in the crosshairs of someone like Hancock with a really weird theory. Well, you're out there because they are suppressing the truth.
Yeah. Driving out reputable people, but with new ideas which are unpleasant to the older guard. Yeah, that
Yeah.
does leave a void, and that will leave a void. And unfortunately, Hancock is the type of person who fills it.
Hmm. Yeah. Someone mentioned on the stream that his books
Uh-huh.
are getting 4.5 out of 5 star ratings or 5 out of 5, and that's
Yeah,
because he's an excellent writer.
yeah.
He
I
truly
mean, no
is.
one's debating that he's popular. I mean, even the episode itself talked about him selling, what, 5 million copies, something ridiculous. I mean, yeah,
Right.
he's very popular, and he will get lots of people saying, "I love this book." But loving something does not equate to truth.
Yep. That's very true. Very true.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, of course he's popular. That's why he's selling so many.
Well, he's popular in part because he's a good writer, that he can
Yeah,
inspire people with his vision, but his vision doesn't come from empirical evidence.
no. I mean, the fact that he can be charming and plausible in his writing, I was going to say, is exactly how it works. It draws you in with a beautiful story, but the beautiful story
Mm.
isn't the same as the truth. I mean, we love watching
Hmm.
Stargate. We don't believe it's true.
Yes. Well, there are people who believe that the Holy Grail was a real object and the quest for it was a real event because it's such a beautiful story, when in
Yeah.
fact those were stories that began out of bits of Celtic fairy tales woven together by the French mainly. They took an English or Welsh and English story, made it their own, added Lancelot and Guinevere, and
Hmm.
thanks to a few writers, some of whom were absolutely brilliant, they made this most beautiful of stories that nearly 1,000 years later, many people would want to believe actually happened, but it didn't happen
Yeah.
any more than Middle Earth happened.
No, I know. Middle Earth. Oh,
Yeah, see, as soon as you say Middle Earth, someone out there is going, "Oh, I wish that were true." And how can you not wish on some level that that was true?
I was just thinking, poor old Tolkien. He must be spinning in his grave right now. But
Rings of what?
you totally misunderstood what I meant by elves.
I'd love Tolkien to come back from the grave. He'd get canceled so quickly.
Yeah, yeah, I know. He, C.S. Lewis, they wouldn't last 5 minutes.
No, and C.S. Lewis was he was wonderful, and yeah, I keep trying to think, how do I bring up this topic? He was wonderful because he would reach out to people like H.G. Wells and say, I've read your books, including the atheist historical tracts, and I have this to say about them, and sometimes agree, sometimes disagree. And then he would say, this is how I really do love your writing. I really do
Yeah.
enjoy, or the world's, or whatever. And he would begin this dialogue, and they would often write back, and at least they would have something nice to say to each other. Whereas now, if someone disagrees
Mm.
with you about one thing, you're supposed to call them names, and
Yes, I know. The art of debate does seem to be largely dead at the moment, which is kind of the reason why we're doing this series right now, is so that at least you and I can have a debate about things. We don't
yeah,
agree about everything, and you could tell that we have disagreed all the way through the beginning of this thing, but
yeah,
we don't hate each other. We can be civil, and we can have a discussion because we disagree.
yeah. There'd be nothing to talk about if we didn't disagree. And it helps to go in with a healthy amount of humility to say, I don't know what happened. I have some
Yes,
ideas. Some of them might work out, some of them might not. So
I
there it is.
I hope that in the video we just watched, I don't come across as if I know everything. I mean, in the first video, I really tried to play up the fact that I'm not an expert in this. In this one, I kind of did have to draw on the fact that I do know how academic research is done. I mean, that bit I can't just shy away from, but I'm not professing any expertise in the area of archaeology itself.
You came across as highly annoyed, which was actually quite amusing.
Highly annoyed. Yeah, that there is just something about. I mean, when he says "I don't care," you should kind of care about something that's directly related to the work you are doing.
Yes. Yes,
That
it kind of raises
really
the
did annoy
question,
me.
is he being honest or is he taking too many psychedelics? I mean,
uh,
because there's an important question every honest person should ask themselves, which is, if I
mm,
were wrong, how would I know?
mm,
And if you don't ask that, you become Graham Hancock, where you say, I don't care what these people say, I'm right.
yeah.
Well, there's a time to do that, such as, you see a bomb under someone's car and you refuse to let anyone near it, and someone says,
Mm,
there's no bomb. You say, I don't care what you think. I'm right
Yeah,
because you saw the bomb. But that
yeah,
is such a fringe moment in one's life. How many people come across a live bomb and are responsible for keeping normal people away from it? It hardly ever happens, for Pete's sake.
and
Normally,
it's
you
weird.
have to say, I could be wrong about this. I'm going to leave the door open. I could be wrong. And if someone shows me I'm wrong, I may not like it, but
Yeah.
I'm going to at least be gracious.
He's also weirdly inconsistent with his deference or respect for ancient cultures. He's on the
Mm,
one hand saying these ancient cultures, or this one particular ancient culture, has given us all of our astronomy, writing, architecture, everything. They're brilliant. And the other saying, oh well, the Egyptian priesthood, they weren't pedants. They were just doing a rough sketch of some of bits of stuff that's in the sky. It's like, no, the Egyptian priesthood, backed by their knowledge of astronomy, or astronomy slash astrology, because it was all one thing back then,
yeah.
was very precise. Those shafts built into the pyramid are really well crafted, but you don't get something that long and straight to point at a star at a given time of year by just slapping it together. I mean, it's
Yeah.
ah, no, that they weren't. They were precise and they were technical and they did know how to do stuff in this instance, which you've just brushed away,
Yeah.
and you're making up stuff, pretending to vast amounts more skill of the people that we have no evidence for existing at all.
Yes, he's in love with what he believes happened in the past, and he is his own best source of what happened in the past. So it's coming off like, I'm not a psychologist here, but it's coming off like maybe narcissism.
Yeah, oh well, let's not get dragged too far down the dissecting his psychology route, I suppose. But
No, but it does seem he's in love with his own ideas, and that's a little scary because I
uh,
can be in love with my ideas, but I'm not on YouTube telling you what to think. Right? There's the difference.
yes, exactly. So I'm just checking the chat because we've been very bad at looking at it. Thanks, words and pictures. Back to Phil Mitchell as a geezer. Um, yes, and Phil nicked the TARDIS. Oh, yes, always good to look at the chat. Um, I learned Atlantis is real and the cult of leather goods. Yes, yeah, I couldn't help
Cult
the
of leather
cult.
goods.
Yeah, only interest in the belt.
It's called the Prada conspiracy, and they're linked with the Freemasons and the Knights Templar and the guy who used to run the pub down in East Acton. Yeah, there it's all connected.
Yes, clearly. What was I going to say? There's something. It's reminding me of something.
We were both going to
Um,
say something brilliant, but we forgot what it was. Hang with us,
yeah,
everybody. It will come up eventually.
it's going to be well worth the wait, I'm sure. I wonder what it was.
Two old geezers are 2 hours into a live stream before they think of something clever to say.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very disappointed that more people haven't tried to jump into the actual stream itself. This is just ridiculous. I mean, us two holding up the walls, holding up the roof of this stream until it all collapses, after an hour. It's just two very sparse pillars, or pillocks. One of
We're
the
holding
other.
we're holding up the roof, but I can tell you it was built 12,000 years ago by an Atlantean named Jim, and he was a part-time mason, part-time plumber, and you can tell he really loved his work because I'm looking at a hieroglyph of a plunger right now.
Oh my god! Hang on.
Dr. Alex's belly button, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my goodness! Did my belly button come out?
No, but
Phew. I
Graham
just had to
Hancock
plug
can
in
make
the.
things up, so can I.
I had to plug in the laptop because the audio laptop, which I'm currently using for streaming, is working very well, but its battery isn't great, and I'm now worried that it's going to overheat now it's had its mains power plug back in. If everything goes quiet, old media guy, you'll just have to hold it together while I get the other laptop to do that job.
Well,
That's
what
what
I'll do then is my famous live stream miming act.
without your picture on screen.
Yes, that's why it's so famous. Most people
Oh
do it
god.
with a camera. I'm brave enough to do one without the camera.
Oh god. Yes. Oh, well, I mean, it's a bit of a risque one to talk about, but
Yeah.
first time I ever saw Graham Hancock on TV. Do you know when that was?
No.
It was not in his documentary that he got on Channel 4 in 1998 that made me and my two friends and colleagues scream at the television at regular intervals as he spouted nonsense that was based on nothing. It was he was in Michael Palin doing his Around the World in 80 Days in the late 80s.
Okay.
So when someone in the chat mentioned Monty Python, I couldn't help but think, yeah, actually, he did know at least one Python very briefly. And in the episode, I can't remember where he was based. It might have been in Egypt, or it was certainly somewhere, I think, in North Africa. And I suspect from the route he took, he probably only went to Egypt. So it looks like Graham Hancock was based in Egypt as a journalist, and the only reason that he was on was because he was the local person that Michael Palin could ask questions about to get stuff and how to get on to the next destination. So he popped up for about 5 minutes chatting to Michael Palin about his local knowledge in that, and then you never see him again until 6, 7, 8 years later, he suddenly gets his Channel 4 series. I do wonder what effect meeting Michael Palin had on Graham Hancock.
Yeah. And after his last get together with Joe Rogan, I've wondered about how many psychedelics he's taking, because he said things like, we have a right to our psychedelic experiences, that these ancient cultures had so much more insight than us because they were using psychedelics. And I had a couple thoughts with that. One is that the reason science, which is accessible to the human race, develops in Western Europe, first off, is because there was a moratorium on using psychedelics. Well, it's not the reason, but it's a reason. Meaning that if you want to discover the world when psychedelics are free to use, you can use them and have pleasurable and enjoyable experiences that leave you feeling like you know some aspect of the truth you did not know before. And then you might attempt to communicate that to other people for the rest of your life. On the other hand, if you live in a society where there is a moratorium on that, you can't. You have to actually get your hands dirty doing something practical and then think about what you're doing. And then those ideas are transformed by the most brilliant of the brilliant into what we call science. Because you don't have access to psychedelic knowledge, you're stuck with the imperial world, which turns into the world of thought. What are we actually doing? Which then turns in the world of theory, which is how we get mathematics. First algebra, then we get calculus, and so on and so on and so on. I honestly don't think you would get mathematics in a society where people can drop acid during the weekend and take a long trip to somewhere that may or may not exist. You have to be very invested in what is to develop science. So I wonder if that is, perhaps what I'm saying is controversial to some people, but I wonder if psychedelics represents a cul-de-sac, that you can get a lot out of it, but you don't go anywhere in the end. Whereas the far less interesting real world, if you study that, you eventually do get theories that apply to everyone, everywhere, all the time.
Yes.
So that would be my concern.
Yeah, I think your concern is valid. I haven't done psychedelics, but I do know people who have, and I do know people for whom it has been useful. And this is, I think, you're right, but not in, or we've gone slightly too far against it. It's become so prohibitive dealing with psychedelics that even those who want to do scientific research in psychedelics, particularly with regards to treating various mental disorders,
right,
are now stymied. There's so much difficulty dealing with the illegal drugs, because that's the essential problem, that they can't do the research they want to do. So, or it's incredibly difficult, depending where in the world you are, to do that research. So we may have gone slightly too far. I think you're right that doing loads of drugs and trying to produce a cosmology paper may not go hand in hand. Speaking as a cosmologist, but I haven't done psychedelics. Who knows? I may be much more productive. Who knows? But I think we may have put too big a door in the way of studying psychedelics.
I'd have to agree, because there certainly is room for research with MDMA and PTSD, and also microdosing LSD with the same thing. I mean, if there is a drug that will, in the case of MDMA, it makes you feel so good that you can recount what happened to you during that horrible experience when such and such happened. And they've tried. This has been done with multiple studies, and again, I'm not an
Mhm.
expert. Where the
No, me neither.
control group doesn't take the MDMA and they get traumatized by having to relive it, whereas the treatment group can relive the experience, but they feel so wonderful that the terror is dissipating, is
Yes, I have heard a
dissipated
little
rather,
bit of that.
because some of the drug. So yes,
Yeah,
in an actual study where this is being properly done with measured doses of the pure stuff, and you record all the good effects and the bad effects. Yes, we desperately need that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I don't think we're going to disagree too much on that one. That yeah, we think
But
those
here's the other
things
thing.
help.
Here's the issue with just taking it indiscriminately, and I found this out from an ER nurse. If you want to find out what human nature is really like, talk to an ER nurse who's worked the midnight
Yeah,
shift. People come in having way too much alcohol and feel bugs crawling all over them and such. You can talk them down. You can say, look,
yeah.
what you're having is a reaction to the alcohol. It isn't really happening. It feels like it, but there aren't bugs on you. You can talk them down. Whereas
Hmm.
the people on, say, too much acid or bad acid, at least, you cannot. They believe that whatever they're experiencing is real. And it makes me wonder that if you take too much of it and say have a vision of what life was 12,000 years ago that's so beautiful, would you not pursue that to your dying day, trying to grasp this vision, which in fact was not true?
Of course, we're
I
not
don't.
saying that Graham Hancock actually did this, but we're just
No,
mathematically.
no, 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 no. I'm just saying, what if? And
Yeah, what if he did?
even if he did, I would feel pity for him if he said, "Yeah, that's actually what happened. I had this LSD experience in 1995, and I had this vision, and I'm chasing it." I would feel nothing but pity for him, because chasing those visions, I can see how that would be a quest one would uh, feel justified in following. But if you're following a mirage, the best advice would be stop. It's not
Yeah,
getting you where you think you're going.
I think for those who use psychedelics, particularly to help with psychological problems or psychological disorders or psychological trauma and damage, um, who would do it effectively
Yeah.
would regard that what they're seeing as something generated by those very things, those very internal things that are actually the reason they're taking it. Um, if you see something and think that's something external that existed, um, that might be a problem. And yes, that might lead you down a rather crazy rabbit hole.
It can. I did know a guy who stopped taking psychedelics because he took a dose, and he went to this land with all of these little people. I don't mean uh, people with growth issues. I mean the people right out of Irish legends. And he
Right.
interacted with them, and it was partly scary and partly nice. And then he came back, and the next weekend he took another dose, saw the same people, and one of them looked right at him and said, "Why are you back? We let you go last time."
Hmm.
And he said, "Something sinister is going on here. I couldn't tell you what it is, but I know it's bad, and I'm not doing this again."
Hmm. That seems a very sensible, sensible response to that.
Yeah, it
Even
does.
as I
Yeah.
suspect it is, it was nothing external. I.e., the little people weren't actually, hadn't visited him because of the psychedelic. But if you recognize within yourself that those you're giving yourself warnings, those things are generated by yourself, and they are warning you not to do something, you probably should listen to them.
Yeah, it's definitely a warning of some point. And yeah, you can either be a
Yeah,
fool or you can say, "You know what? I got to find a different hobby."
yeah. It's amazing the weird tangents we get off on these things, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the tangent. People are probably tuning in for the tangents more than the topic.
If they're tuning in at all.
If they're tuning,
Paul,
yes.
yeah, Paul Ingleson has been there and retracted the message. I wonder what that was.
Yes, we're going to be live
And
streaming on YouTube this weekend, where we will be seen by well over 3 people.
yeah, exactly.
But those 3 people are more than welcome, and we're glad you're with
Oh,
us.
absolutely. Otherwise, why on earth would we be doing this? It's live gym, not as you know it. Says words and pictures, and that's about all we've got. So, hang on, why am I just watching the top chat? I hate it when it does that. There could be millions of more interesting messages stuffed in the live chat. Oh, not really. So yeah, um, what else? Oh yeah, what else could we talk about in terms of what we've just been watching?
Yes, lost technology. That is one.
Go on in.
I'm trying to think how to put it. Graham Hancock brings up a lot of topics where I can go with him about 10% of the way, and then I have to stop and say, "I think you've gone too far."
Mm-hmm.
and one is lost technology. There is definitely lost technology out there. We know this empirically because it's a documentary, I believe it's made by Nova in the United States,
I
about
know Nova, yeah.
grass bridges in South America, in the
Yep.
Andes, where a flat expanse of land is a rare thing indeed. And it's usually one mountain gorge after another. And
Mhm.
because of that, these people looking at this mountain gorge saying, I'm going to have to spend all day going down the gorge and then back up again, that someone somewhere had this brave idea. Why don't we take this mountain grass, dry it out, and weave it into a bridge that will literally carry us across from one side to the other in 20 minutes after the bridge is
Indeed.
constructed. And this
I know the
became
ones
such
you
a
mean.
formalized process that each social group, socioeconomic group within the village society would do one part of the construction so that the whole
Mhm.
village would make this thing and they could literally just walk across. Well,
Yes.
in North America, that's lost if we ever
Uh,
had it.
I was gonna say, it's not totally lost because they still do that in South
Right. It's
America
not
as well.
but it's lost here.
I agree.
It's not lost
Um,
there. So lost technology does not mean aliens. It means you had it, you don't have it now.
yeah.
In Peru, they
The
had the technology to mine a 100-ton, 200-ton blocks, get them down one mountain, up another, down and up, not down that second mountain, up a third, and then put it in place for a temple. We assume it's a temple. How'd they do
mm,
it? We don't know. Lost
mm,
technology doesn't mean it was anti-gravity alien technology, but they had something that we've lost.
yeah,
And
really good
so,
pulleys.
yeah,
For
one
example.
topic I will go 1/10 of the way in with Graham Hancock on is
Mm.
that's not studied enough at the PhD level, or if it is, the people who are doing it aren't given enough resources.
Yeah, yeah. I think I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't know how much obstruction there is to their work, particularly the young ones. But the young ones, well, I do know in my field, the young ones do all the work. I mean, it's the PhD students who do all the research, not the
Yeah.
supervisors generally. The supervisors do some research as well, but the point of having research students is to do the research. So the youngsters in my field definitely do it. I would be surprised if it wasn't the same way in archaeology these days. I think the youngsters are doing most of the work.
Yeah, that I couldn't tell you. It would be wonderful to have an actual expert on to kind
Yeah,
of
that is true.
balance
Yeah,
us out.
it would be
But
really good to have.
check the comment section. The kiosk just left a couple of interesting comments you might want to
Oh,
read.
in comments. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, no, in the chat. I see. I see. Hello. All right. That's the kiosk. A decade or so ago, I explored psychedelics and meditation. I saw a high dimensional circle grid a few times through a candle flame. Third time, I saw an Ogdru Jihad looking thing. I have to say, I don't know what an Ogdru Jihad is, but
I'm afraid I
I'm
don't
sure it was.
either.
Uh, and then he says, there are now 4 lights. I don't even know how I got here.
We feel the
But yeah,
same on that, yes.
yeah.
There are
um,
4 lights.
indeed. Completely flipped my head out here. Can't remember what I was going to say now. Doesn't matter. Um,
Well, I must admit the temptation to see what a higher dimensional circle grid looks like, but
yeah.
at the same time, I am wary that. See, so one of the differences between Dr. Alex and I is he
Hmm.
doesn't believe there are external forces operating that can be seen through the use of psychedelics, and I do. Which one was right?
Um,
Don't know. Don't care.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
I mean, I was more on that side than the other, but I'm not discounting the possibility
Okay,
entirely.
my apologies. But my
No, it's
point
fine. I
being,
mean,
I don't want to, if they're out there, I don't want to see them. Certainly not that way. And I'm afraid if I saw a higher dimensional circle grid, I would become so enamored with it that I would try to recreate it here on Earth, whether or not I had the actual skill to get there, i.e., through mathematics or some
mm,
form of theoretical physics.
it is sounding it's creeping into Lovecraftian territory right now.
Owl eye inside a Giger style tentacle monster. It looked like interlinked Pokeball outlines.
Where did you see
Wow.
that?
That's what Kiosk is saying that he
Oh
saw
yeah,
when
I
he was.
just got. I'm a bit lagging behind for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
See, the
yeah. Mm,
closest I ever got to an experience like that was the first time the doctor prescribed me hydrocodone. And I had three visions. I only remember one of them, and one was this giant brain-like creature. And I'm like, you know what? I'm good. I don't need to see that again.
Hmm. I think I can
The
understand
inner
that
and
vision.
outer are one and the same, in my view. Could very well be. Could very well be.
Yeah. And Darren M's talking about ELO's Time album, which I think I do actually have somewhere, but it has been a long time since I listened to it.
I would just personally, I would prefer to have those kinds of experiences while I'm stone cold sober because I think I could trust them more. But what do I know? I will continue to repeat, I'm not an expert. You don't have to believe what I say about this.
Yeah, that is the beauty of these streams. We are not experts in the things we talk about. Although now you've reminded me about something I did want to talk about. What shall I do for the next one? Now, I'm just leaving that completely open because that's insane. But I'm torn between two routes to go down.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is that, well, actually, there are three routes I could. Okay, this is going to be like Monty Python. Three. There are three routes I could go
Five,
down.
sir.
Fanatical devotion to the Pope. Now, the the first one I was thinking of doing was the Memory of Water one, which is about homeopathy and how
Oh, the
even
memory of
well-meaning
water.
scientists, yeah, Memory of
Oh
Water,
my gosh.
even
You
well-meaning,
know what fish do in water, people? Do you know?
yeah, and everyone else. Um, so that was one of the ones I was thinking of covering. Then I also thought the Bible Code is a nice one as well. That would really get Svilekin enthused, I suspect, if he gets to see that. And so it's a shame he must be still very ill because he's not here right now.
Yeah,
But
that one died pretty quickly, and I'm content to leave it dead
the Bible
because
Code
it
one.
was a yeah, because it was a complete use of both Judaism and statistics.
What's wrong with that? No, it, it's a good episode though. It's a good
Yes,
episode because it
yes.
does talk
Yes.
about statistical significance and we I only just showed Moby Dick yesterday as well.
I
It
must
would
admit
link
I
into
haven't
that.
seen Moby Dick yet.
Oh, you haven't seen the cartoon? Well, that's not the
No,
point,
no,
but
not the
really,
cartoon. I've tried reading the book 5 or 6 times, and each time, see, what is that? Synesthesia. I have a little bit of synesthesia. So
uh-huh.
sometimes when I read a book, I get a physical feeling associated with that book. And if the feeling's uncomfortable, I just can't go on. And I get that with Moby Dick, that Herman Melville was just struggling with something that
Hmm.
it bothered him immensely, but he was also attracted to it. And the image of the captain and the whale is all about this struggle he's having with this thing in his life, and it just makes me feel uncomfortable. So I had to make do with the John Huston film.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that because even the cartoon, it's heavy. It is heavy going. Not easy to get through. It's definitely the most depressing of the cartoons I think we've shown in the series. Um, Although the main protagonist, call me Ishmael, does survive to the end, floating on a wrecked piece of boat and gets picked up. But I don't know if that's in the original. Well, maybe that isn't the original book because I mean the book is told by someone, I assume. But
Hmm.
yeah, but that was the first two options. Wait a minute. But the third option was doing M theory, which was more in my actual wheelhouse. So it's not cosmology quite. It's string theory and multidimensional theory. So the floor above where I used to have to work and out beyond my pay scale as well. But it at least is closer to what I actually know about. So what do you think?
Well, as far as M theory goes, is the presentation enough so that, say, someone like me would understand it?
I think it probably is. I've used this material to teach uh, very inexperienced people about science in general. And I think the beauty of Horizon is that they were designed to be accessible to the general public. Yeah.
Hmm. Yes,
But
yes. The same with Nova here in America.
yeah, they a lot of them are actually co-productions and they just revoiced them or did different
Right,
narration, but they were
right.
often filmed the same. I do actually have one Nova in my collection, which I do want to get to at some point because it was about um, higher thought processes in chimps and bonobos and higher primates. Um, and it's a very good Nova episode. So I will at some point get to that, obviously, but
Does it
that one will
talk
be
about
somewhere.
Coco the gorilla's nipple obsession?
I can't remember if it does that, but it definitely has some solving. I think it has the mourning. It has chimps mourning for the death of one of their group, and it has some interesting puzzle solving by bonobos. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Oh, Words and Pictures has another good comment that you might wish to read and
Oh, hello.
we can discuss, because it is a comment that I have sympathy with, complete and utter sympathy with.
Yes. First of all, the Soda Ranger says the world's most depressing cartoon. Yeah, he survived. I thought he died at the end. No, no, I think it was him waving at the end. So I'm pretty sure it wasn't dead. But yeah, it was not a great in terms of uplifting cartoon. That's for sure. Words and pictures. Back to the more serious bit. Graham Hancock writes and presents science in a way people can relate to. Yeah, I like that you had science in quotes there. Thank you. Uh, Unlike actual scientists who write and present science in a way that educates people. Yes, of course.
No,
The
no, he didn't say
greatest
educates. He says excludes.
excludes. Oh, sorry, excludes people. Okay, that's I can still say my next sentence because it still works. Of course, the very best of them could both relate. People could relate to it, and they were actual scientists. And the ones I'm thinking, of course, are Carl Sagan, who was undeniably a
Yes,
scientist, but also a great public communicator,
he was.
and even
Yes.
Feynman, who's an
Hmm.
undeniably brilliant scientist, could really communicate well with the general public.
Yes, and we need more communicators like that who both know the science and know how to communicate. And one of the problems with academia is it is fossilized in its categorization, meaning that if you have a degree, excuse me, if you have two degrees, one in this department, one in that department, they don't look upon you as an asset. They look at you as a liability. And if I recall right from Carl Sagan's biography, that he was not attacked, but talked down to and discouraged from doing these presentations for the average person because that wasn't real science, that they should keep it in the club somehow,
Mm,
which is I don't think that is a part and parcel of science. I think it's any group of people become elitist if they're left to their own devices for too long. And we need people like that who are experts in whatever field. I don't care if it's in underwater cave diving and they don't have a degree. They've just done it 100 times.
yeah.
We need presentations from people like them on YouTube or some other venue where they explain to the average person, this is what we're doing, this is what's going on. And it's
Yeah.
wonderful to write a paper that's so tough that only 10 people in the world can understand it. But as someone else has said, if you can't explain your paper to the bartender, you probably don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the TED Talks are good for this, but they're only one avenue, and there's a limit to how many they can make. And yeah, you're right. The more, obviously, the scientists have to also have time to do their research. But yeah, the
They
more
do.
they can be persuaded to talk to people generally, the better.
Absolutely. And the issue I have with mathematics itself, is it's
Uh-huh.
so hard to describe. You will hear people say, I hate math. Oh, really? What math did you take? I took algebra. So what you really hate is algebra. Yes, I hated it. So I hate math. That's like saying I hate all of the oceans on the earth because I grew up in a swamp, right?
Yeah,
A swamp is one type of environment with lots and lots of water. It's
yeah,
not the same as a river. It's not the same as the Gulf of Mexico. It's not the same as the North Atlantic, the North Sea, what have you. It's different, but how to explain it to other people is really tough.
yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
once came up with an explanation about mathematical infinity types, and I ran it past other mathematicians, and they said, well, you didn't do the definition justice. So, of course not. I was trying to reach the average person and get them to understand what we're talking about, and they were
Mm.
completely dismissive of my attempts. Maybe my attempt was wrong,
I
but
do
they
get the
weren't,
impression.
at the same time, they weren't offering me help to say, no, explain it like this instead of that,
Yeah.
which is what I wanted.
I get an impression that maybe we're both out of touch, and maybe things have changed. But it seems that the American academic system seems more old-fashioned and hidebound than the UK one, from my perspective and my limited perspective. Because to be fair, I was only looking from the world of cosmology, but I know. Well, to be fair, I did have wider contact with the university I was based in as a whole. And outreach was an important part of what the university had to do. It was part of their funding depended on their outreach. I did outreach while doing my PhD. I think you're more likely to find the PhD students doing it than the supervisors, but in this country at least, it was a heavily pushed part of the responsibility of the academic institution to get your academics out there doing outreach and talking about their work to school children quite frequently, but also the general public as well.
I did not see that where I went to school. It would have been wonderful if we had. I don't know if that's happening now. What we get on the news is usually dire, but then again, the news people don't want to talk about anything that isn't dire. So if there's good news, we
Yes.
probably wouldn't hear it. So I don't know. I don't know if there is outreach with math because A, as soon as you say it, people go, oh, I hate it. Second, how do you explain what's going on in general relativity? I mean, how do
Outreach
you
of
explain the math
yeah.
behind that? And there's the other thing, you get these awful situations where the mathematicians diss the physicists and vice versa
Mm.
because of different reasons, and they just come off sounding like children having a fight as opposed to people who are actually working to expand human knowledge.
Yes. I do have Fermat's last theorem horizon as well on my list, but which
Ooh.
is at least a maths one. Um,
The
there's
short
so
version
many.
is Fermat thought he found a proof. He didn't. A new proof was found recently. The end.
Yeah, in a way that was definitely not the way he did it.
No, it's not
But he still
possible.
did it. Um,
Here's an interesting thing about math. When um, when Newton developed calculus, he said it works because there are numbers that are smaller than any given number, meaning no matter what number you give me, my number is smaller. Well, if you think about that a little bit, that's kind of crazy because
mm,
if you say, well, what about 1/2? I say 1/4 is smaller. Then you respond, well, then I choose a tenth, and a quarter is bigger than a tenth. So what are you talking about? But Newton insisted this was true, and it was used in Newtonian calculus until the 19th century when the British um, mathematicians had to admit that Leibniz had a better explanation, and so on and so on and so on. Skip ahead to the 1960s, where we have
mhm,
set theory, which allows us to describe things much better than we did previous to set theory. And someone comes up with a way to come up with a number that's smaller than any given number. He calls them the hyperreal numbers.
mm,
And with that, you can basically do calculus just like Newton described, and it's quicker, simpler, easier than standard calculus. But so few people understand it, it can't be taught. So that's a
mm,
situation we have in math where you literally have a way to do calculus that is very intuitive, but hardly anyone understands it. And I guess there's not a whole lot of money going towards its education because in America we have this thing about spending too much on education. One side says you're spending too much, the other says you're not spending enough. And then we look at the schools and we see that they're graduating people who can't read, write, or think. And yeah, a bit of a mess over here.
mm. Yes, I've only been to the US once in an academic um, sense for a conference on cosmology. Um, but I don't know, it did feel a little different over there than it did in the rest of Europe. Obviously I am based in Europe, and it was that was more familiar to me. Going to the US just felt a little weird, but I can't be being very unscientific here. I can't really put a good description to why I felt it was odd and didn't feel like the rest of the world.
Well, I tell you, if you want one difference between the UK and the US, this is just one metric. Look at our baking shows, right? You've got
Right.
the Great British Bake Off, I think it's called, where you've got 6 people in this pavilion cooking,
I
and they
should
they have
remind
to
you, I
cook
don't
the
attend
same
those.
thing.
Carry on.
But if it's actually very pleasant to watch because it is a competition, but it's very low key. So,
Hmm.
for example, one contestant's done with their recipe, it's in the oven, and they see someone struggling, and they'll just turn around and say, "Can I help?"
This is the
Yes,
UK
yeah,
one,
if you would cut this up for me, that would be great. And so they cut it up, and
yeah. Uh-huh.
the level of competition is such that you can turn around and help me, and I can turn around and help you, and it's all good. The American competitions, cooking competitions, they're cutthroat, and they
Yeah,
set them up to be
the knives
cutthroat.
don't help each other. The knives get used differently. Um,
Yes, and it's competitive to the nth degree, and I can see how that has made America different from other places in the world, but
Mm.
it's to our cost in a certain sense. There is a time for extreme competitiveness. There's a time for cooperation. And perhaps on a local level, Americans have that because I don't have any complaints about my neighborhood or my city or even my state on that level.
Yeah.
But as soon as we get into any form of media, it's, will this person beat the other person? Will this person destroy the other person's dreams? And I'm thinking, is this entertainment? Because I'm not enjoying this.
Is this a healthy attitude? Yeah, I know. I know. I know. Yeah,
I don't.
yes.
Not everything can be the Great British Bake Off, but it would be nicer if more things were. Where, yeah, I'm competing, but if you win, I'm not going to wish you dead.
Yeah. It's yeah. It's academia in this side. I mean, it's competitive. You want to be the one who publishes,
Oh
and
yeah,
it varies from discipline to discipline quite narrowly, actually. It reminds me. You remind. Not everything is roses over here either. A
right,
friend of mine who was working in the plasma physics side of things, but we were actually all in the same um, PhD research room because it was open plan. Um, he got his paper stopped by the person reviewing it for publication in a journal because that person had a paper on the same subject and he wanted to get his out first,
right.
which, yeah, is despicable. Um, in my field, cosmology, we always do archive first. And I don't know if you know what the archive is.
Go ahead and explain for those who don't know.
Archive.org, that's
Mm-hmm.
arxiv.org,
Yep.
is a preprint archive where we publish in cosmology. The practice is to publish there first. As soon as you've got a paper ready for publication, ready to submit to a journal, you put it up on the archive. Um, we do this in cosmology because, believe it or not, cosmology is quite a fast-moving field. You might think it wouldn't be, given it's looking at the entirety of space and time. Surely it can't be that fast-moving. But the research actually progresses quite quickly. So the habit has become to put it on the preprint archive first, and you then access papers there long ahead of them being published in their journals, and the field moves on apace and quite quickly. But the unintended benefit of this is no one's going to gazump anyone. No one's going to do what happened to my poor plasma physicist friend. No one's going to hold up the publication in a journal because uh, provenance and precedent is already established. The second that appears on the internet, it's there. No one can say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, I came up with it first." No, it's on the archive of that date. You know, it's right there. No one. So, but the point I'm trying to make is cosmology is generally quite a nice cooperative place to work.
Yeah, you do need a certain amount of competition and cooperation, and you get lopsided if it's all one or the other. If
Yeah.
I can change topics radically at this point, one interesting thing about the third season of The Orville is it presents Seth MacFarlane's vision of what a functioning socialist utopia would look like. And one
Mm,
of the ingredients is it's bottom up. There is no coercion. There is no North Korea. There is people saying, I now have a machine that has so much energy. I have all the food I need. I can make my own iPod, my own
mm,
iPad. I can make my own Mona Lisa. I now have every material thing I could ever want. So now that I'm free from that concern, what can I do with my life? And everyone agrees that the socialism is now the way to go. That I literally join um, the union, the equivalent of Starfleet, to help everyone else. I'm doing this partly for myself, but also to help everyone else. And I like the fact that he set that up as bottom up, that this is all volunteer, that no one's being coerced.
yeah.
And I wish to God I remember where I was going with this.
Well,
It
it
was pretty
reminds
good.
me of an essay which, by coincidence, my second supervisor gave to me at university just to read for fun. But it was In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell. It was written in about 1930, so quite old. But he was very much of a mind that much of the work we actually do in the modern world, even then, was busy work. We didn't have to do this
Hmm.
stuff. We could have had way more free time in the Western world, in fact, across the entire world, if even if the wealth of the world was redistributed then. And he said that people should have more idle time so they can do exactly what you're saying. They can explore their own ideas. And I
Yeah.
think he has a point that some people would do that. But I do think a lot of people would just sit on their asses and watch the British Bake Off and do nothing else.
I'll try not to take that personally.
But my
I'm
point, and I
joking.
don't think it would be you, and you know I don't. But I think
I
a lot of
know.
people,
I just had to. Sorry.
I think Bertrand Russell was a little bit rose tinted in his outlook because he just assumed everyone was like
Yes.
him, a diligent academic who wanted to do lots of academic research and nothing else. Well, I think a lot of people would rather just sit on the couch and make a slowly deeper and deeper dent in that than do
Yes.
anything.
Well, he's the one who started that school. Where was it? Oh, where was it? I can't remember where it was, but he started a school where he said,
Newbury?
"Okay, kids, there's going to be no structure. You can do whatever you want," and it went to hell very fast.
Bertrand Russell, yeah.
I believe so. Yeah,
Well,
unless I've got the name
disagree
wrong,
with that.
thinking of the
No, I think
wrong
you're probably right. It
renowned
sounds,
mathematician.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yes, productive people will do something important if you give them more free time.
yeah,
Unfortunately, it's the 80-20 split. 80% of people probably won't, 20 will. Although
yeah,
some of that 80, it's not their fault. They may be too young, they may be too old, they may have medical problems they can't get past, and
yeah,
so
of
on.
course.
But
But a
if
lot
you're
will also.
doing something more than you did yesterday, you're probably on the right track.
Yeah. I personally still think we should aim for a world in which people have the opportunity to choose to do what they want to do rather than being slaves to providing for their basic needs and not having time to do anything else. But if you're going to advocate that, you have to be prepared that there will be a large rump doing nothing.
Yes, that's absolutely true. You look at some of these civilizations where they got a lot done, quote unquote, like classical Rome. Well, how'd they do that? Well, they had an emperor said, "You either do this or I'll cut your head off." It was a good
Mm,
motivation to get something done that day.
yes.
And Words and Pictures says, "I think the amount of dancing cats on YouTube proves your point, Dr. Alex, on idleness."
Thank you. Yes, yeah. I think you're probably. I'm probably right there. You're probably right that I'm right. I just will just pat myself on the back continually now. Um, I'm sure there
Or
was something. Oh, you never.
some people will come up with some interesting things out of their idleness.
Yeah,
And
no. I
well, let's
this is what
hope.
I'm saying. I think people should have that idleness, and we just shouldn't be too hung up about people not making good use of it. I mean, we should make sure that we make good use of it, and worrying about other people's good use of it is maybe not our concern.
Well, that's the thing. It used to be if you were talking about what will these idle people do and will they spend their time wisely, you have ventured far away from government and you are in the realm of religion, i.e., that
Yeah.
part of religion that instructs people of how to best spend their time given these universal principles that are being espoused. And we have
Yes.
lost some of that. We always look to the government to fix our problems. And I'm thinking the
Mm.
people who arrange for you to get your driver's licenses, those people, you want them to tell you how to solve your problems
Yeah, I
because they
know.
seem to solve their problems by giving themselves a huge salary, lots of time off, and making other people do their work for them.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Now, the thing I remember is you have not answered my question.
Oh, I'm
Should I
sorry.
do? Should I do? I've even forgotten what I said now. Oh yeah,
Bible code
should
was
I do
one.
memory of water, Bible code, or string theory? Essentially, an M theory.
I personally would go with M theory
I
because
knew.
it is the least flaky of the three. And
Uh,
you don't want to keep doing documentaries on flaky subjects every Sunday. You would want to have one
agreed.
in
This
there
is
that
why I
has
wanted to
some
skim.
sort of merit to it, and then
Yeah.
go to the memory of water so we can all have a good laugh.
Funnily enough, that was kind of the order I was thinking of. The more I thought about it, yeah. M theory, then memory of water. So anyone who's watching this can stick it in the chat or stick their ideas in the chat or as comments, and I will try and check this. But it won't be. You have about a day or two to change my mind because I'll be starting to make the next video. It's surprisingly a lot of work doing this. You know that, old media guy.
Yes, yeah. The funny thing about YouTube is I have spent several days with a lot of hours trying to get a short video just right. And it gets out there and gets 300 views. And
Mm.
another video I kind of threw together gets 1,000 views. And I'm like, I see no correlation between these two numbers. So I'm just going to do my best.
And one of the Orville videos I threw up, which was one of those silly little ones, got several thousand views. And I was like, whoa, 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 what? I can't remember what it was. It might have been the alternate title sequences, or it might have been the missing scene one. One of those two got surprisingly large numbers of views, more than I ever expected. But I didn't do anything. I did very little.
We've got a couple of good comments here, one from the kiosk and one from Words and Pictures that you might want to read.
That spring, I dug into the extant peer review on all relevant topics, and the conclusion was not difficult to draw. Then I got shadow banned and shunned and eventually deleted my social media. What?
Yes, I'm not quite sure of the topic that the kiosk is talking about, but I will give this story as a world premiere of an actual event that happened to me in early 2020, the year of the lockdown. I happened to be on ivermectin anyway, not due to the coof, but to other reasons, about the time that the coof was announced as a thing and the lockdown was pronounced. And I was on ivermectin until May, I think, well before there was any brouhaha about whether one should take it for the coof or not.
Right.
I did not. I got the coof, I think. I never was tested for it, but given the symptoms, I'm pretty sure I had it. I should have died according to everything we were told at the time about who would die should they get it. I didn't die. I'm right here. And I actually kind of breezed through some of not all of it, but some of it. And I was not able to say on YouTube, hey, I took it, and it seemed to have worked because of the I don't want to call it censorship. What would one call it? Censorship on YouTube, where they wouldn't allow you to say I took ivermectin and it helped.
Right. Yeah.
There it is. And the live stream will be shutting down in a few seconds.
Sorry, say again?
And the live stream will be shutting down in a few seconds, meaning YouTube's going to cut us off because I just said ivermectin worked against the coof. That's a joke. Sorry.
Well, I better address those other two things in the chat then. First of all, ancient Greek quote paraphrase: "Give a discourse, I think it means discourse on reason and logic in the agora, and you'll talk to yourself. Do a jig and a whistle, and you'll have a crowd in a moment." Yeah.
Very, very true.
This is why we have three people, but three very good people in the chat.
Very good people, yes. And Kronos has a good bit there, yeah.
Kronos, has he?
Yeah. So it says, I'd like a good explanation about M theory.
I was going to mention Kronos. Yeah, since you're the only other person to say so, yeah, I think M theory wins it for now. So I also, the added bonus is I get to show one of my holiday snaps. Well, technically not really a holiday snap. I get to show a snap from when I was at a conference in Sicily in July, which the conference mostly involved, it involved talking about physics, but also they had a masala room in the place we were staying where there were barrels of masala ready for you to drink it from in the evenings. And the beach was close by, which is why I have a picture, which I will probably put up because it shows me in the company of physicists on the beach, and one of the people in the actual videos there too. So yeah, it'll be an excuse to put a holiday snap in the middle of the video.
There you go.
All right, you've made my decision. M theory it is then.
I'm looking forward to it because that's something I know very little about.
Yeah, I mean, technically, it's outside my wheelhouse. Okay, one of the guys in the video, I actually acted as secretary for the conference 3 out of the 4 years I was there, which meant I basically took notes of the questions that were asked from the audience about his talk, which meant I also had to keep an eye on his talk as well. So, and he gave basically the same talk for 4 years in a row with minor changes. So I kind of got to know what he was talking about in terms of the language. He was talking about octernians and quaternions.
Stuff
I know nothing. Oh, you go.
I know just I've never used octernians, but the quaternions, they're not too difficult.
I got to the point where I'd done it for 3 out of the 4 years. I got fairly familiar with his diagrams of his numerical structures and stuff. I still don't know what he was talking about. Way above my pay scale, and it was nothing to do with M theory, which was what he's kind of one of the things he's famous for. This was, I think, there was some way it was going to be related to physics, but damned if I know how.
It's just a way to indicate direction very quickly and efficiently. A lot of math comes down to the best possible notation.
Well, it could be linked into multidimensionality and multidimensional thinking, I guess, but I'm damned if I can remember. I do like words and pictures saying Dr. Alex in Budgie Smugglers.
I love
I
budgie smugglers.
don't remember my shorts being that tight, but I actually have the photo, a group of photos outside this very room, so I'll quickly check, see how indecent I look in it first.
I was thinking we might change the name of these live streams to "We're not experts, but dot dot dot."
Oh yeah. Well, this is what they are. This is one of the ones where I actually have to. I can't do that as much. I'm not. I'm not an expert in M theory, and because that's string theory mostly, and I don't know string theory, but I kind of know what they're talking about.
Right.
So I can't go. I'm not an expert, but I'm not an expert. I mean, I can't. I'm confused. Um,
No, I know what you mean. I'm the same way with math. I mean, I'm not an expert in anything with mathematics, but
yeah.
because of the training I've done, when someone starts talking about something that it actually makes sense, I can follow 25% of it. And I once told that to a professor of mine. I said, we were in this differential geometry class, a presentation, excuse me. I turned to him and said, I think I'm getting 20% of it. And he goes, good, I'm getting 25. And he had a PhD
Yeah.
in a completely different field. And he told me that if you walk out understanding 25% of a paper or presentation in someone else's field, you did really well. So getting
Yeah.
just a bit of it's all right.
What was I going to say? Something about. Oh yeah, my supervisor. We spent time with the string theorists, and we did talk to them. We weren't like completely ignoring them, but he often would say, because he was quite cynical, say, "We're perfectly happy with just 4 dimensions. That'll do, thanks." Which is true. Yeah, we were working with 4 dimensional stuff. They were using many more quite frequently.
Well, the
Um,
kiosk, he's got a comment about that.
oh yeah, very let's measure the Stone Age one or the Wikipedia portal on M theory back in the day. Membrane multiple. Yeah, I do have a glancing familiarity with it, and I do think that membrane theory or membranes um, as structures in as a higher dimensional whole in the bulk, as it's sometimes called, it makes sense to me, even if we have no evidence for it. I would not be at all surprised to discover we are a 4 dimensional bubble embedded in some higher dimensional whole.
Yeah, that's not impossible. Especially when
Uh,
we realize how multiple dimensions would view us. I mean, not that we know, but we start to get some idea, at least metaphorically, and realize it's just not that impossible that we are a 4-dimensional bubble trapped in an 11-dimensional space.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I like the concept. I mean, even just one of the simplest ideas of string theory, that the electron is one entity. All those electrons you see are just where it pokes in and out of our 4 dimensional bubble, while the one-dimensional filament that is the electron exists in 11-dimensional bulk and just is threaded all throughout it.
Yes, and if that is true, it certainly takes the idea that we can predict all events and everything follows algorithmically from other events. That just goes right out the window, because
Yeah.
if there are 7 dimensions operating on this thing we call electrons, plural, when it's one thing, but it's operating in dimensions we cannot access, and we need to
It
know what
might,
those electrons are doing to determine what happens next, then determinism's dead. It's deader than
yeah.
a doornail.
It might also be an underpinning for the idea that a quantum object can occupy the same space and quantum state, while those electrons can't occupy the same state and space because it's itself. I mean, it can't sit on top of itself. You can't squash it into itself. This is a very hand wavy way of talking about it, but it might help with certain exclusion principles.
Hmm. I don't know what an
Anyway,
exclusion principle is, so I'm looking forward to the topic next week when we get to go into that in more detail.
well, the
The only
Pauli
exclusion
exclusion
principle
principle.
I know is I ask a gal out and she says no. I'm very familiar with that one.
The Pauli exclusion principle is basically the one I'm describing, where you can't squish things to occupy the same state,
Oh,
um,
okay.
and which is
That makes
where you
sense.
get things like well, you get electron degeneracy pressure. You also get neutron degeneracy pressure, and it's things that hold certain objects up in the universe, for example.
Okay, but
Um,
that raises a really important question, which perhaps only you can answer. How do
mhm.
we reverse the polarity of the neutron flow?
That's my answer. um, Neutrons are a funny thing, aren't they? Now, hang on.
But it's interesting how many mainstream thinkers are now saying we live in a simulation, because if you change the word simulation to creation, suddenly you have an intersection between age-old religious thought and modern science, which not many people want to explore, because generally you don't want to bring religion into science. You just don't. Because
Hmm.
eventually you'll have somebody saying, you can't study that. It's against God's will. It's like, look, buddy, you're not God. Just shut up and sit down, okay?
Hmm. Yeah, it's. Let's hope we don't have the church closing down avenues of research again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That would be
But,
bad.
so Words and Pictures says, old media guy, if you don't ask her out, she might say yes. Ah, it's Schrodinger's date. That's right.
But as the she might say yes, but be somewhere completely different, and you'd never hear her. So yeah.
And Kia says, I have no issue with God being developer, and I absolutely have to agree. My concern is, however, with religion and the power that is generated by the institutions here on earth, which were
Mm.
seen early, so early that St. Augustine had to write City of God to talk about, yeah, there are hypocrites in the church. Yeah, they're abusing their power. And they're here for one reason. The church has power. Therefore, they go into the church so they
Mm.
can build their power. But that is not what the church is.
Yes.
That is
No.
what they're doing with it. And since we are now seeing the beginnings of Christian nationalism in this country, I need to stand up and say, excuse me, I'm not only a theist, I'm also a Christian. I do not believe in Christian nationalism,
Yeah.
because as soon as you set that up, suddenly it's, well, which do we got to get rid of the Jews? Do we got to kick out the Muslims? We got to eradicate the Buddhists. And once we do that, do we get rid of the Catholics? Because they're not really Christian, are they? Because you get some of that here in America. It's like, I don't want any of that ever.
And you might have thought Atlantis was a slippery slope, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
it'll be a lot worse. Yeah.
Yeah, you never want to believe a politician who says, "I know what God wants." Like, yeah, God wants you in the funny farm, dude.
Yeah, there was a nice scene in Stargate, I seem to remember, with Senator Kinsey um, invoking God to try and persuade the Stargate team that he was right. And like, oh, yeah, right, really? You've got God on your side as well, have you?
Yeah. If someone says you should love your neighbor and I've got God on my side, you might want to listen. If someone says you shouldn't study mathematics or whatever and God's on my side, it's like, yeah, just give the guy Xanax and hope for the best.
Mhm.
Well, there's
Yeah,
something we could talk about, although there
go
would
on.
not be a documentary to go along with it, and that would be the movement in math called the finitists, or even better, the ultra finitists, the ones who say calculus doesn't really exist. That's a very bad summary of what they're saying, but it's pretty close, because what they're
Mm.
saying is infinite quantities don't exist. So pi doesn't go on forever. E
Mm.
doesn't go on forever. Only the numbers that we can encapsulate in a finite space, if you will, exist. The others don't.
Huh.
So, in other words, they
That's interesting.
discretize all of mathematics and they throw out
Yeah.
everything else. They're rare. Not many people believe them, but
Hmm.
it's a fascinating subgroup within math. There's some people like that on YouTube. They won't tell you they're ultra finitists. They'll just tell you everything you learned about math is wrong. You need to listen to me. And they don't actually
See,
prove what they're saying is true.
I can only speak as a physicist, but we do hold our own peculiar ideas to try and function in the world, whether or not they're true. Like my leanings in physics are definitely towards general relativity. I tend to think of things being continua rather than the quantum description, which is discretized, if I can use that word. Um, but my natural inclination is to think that things are smeared out and, you know, would be continuous. And the discrete nature is something of an illusion, which I guess is perhaps, ironically, why I might even like the idea of multidimensional theories and M theory, because then your quantum objects can themselves end up being stretched out long strings, or
Mm,
membranes, and you've got these discretized objects in our four-dimensional bubble which turn out to be continuous. But I have no basis for this belief either way.
hmm
It just helps me try and keep a handle on what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's true. And we do need those kludges in our thought because let's face it, we're not Einsteins, we're not Newtons. There's only so far we can go. The only problem is when we hold on to those kludges for too long, or you build your career on them, which means you definitely don't want to get rid of them, like
Mm.
phlogiston or the ether.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even within general relativity itself, I think the wrong things all the time. When I imagine the potential shapes for four-dimensional space times, like you've got flat, you've got saddle shape, you've got closed, um, but those shapes I'm imagining are um, three-dimensional shapes. They're two-dimensional
Right.
surfaces spread in a third dimension. Those pictures are wrong, but those
Yeah.
pictures do help me understand what I'm doing. So I can't imagine the real thing, the one with all the correct number of dimensions. I can't imagine it. So I have to use placeholders in my head, which are clearly wrong, but they
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, there were, I think, two mathematicians in the early 20th century who tried to visualize a four-dimensional sphere, and both of them went crazy.
Mm,
That's the story I was told. Meaning, you don't,
yeah.
don't worry about trying to visualize four dimensions. Several brilliant people have tried it, and they went nuts. We're just not able to do it.
No, our primitive monkey brains can't do it.
Of course, you can cheat with the fourth dimension and simply say the fourth dimension is time. Therefore, a four-dimensional bubble is simply one that's moving through time and changing with time. And that's as
Yeah,
close as I'll ever get.
yeah, but it still doesn't. It still doesn't give you a good, weirdly, a good mathematical description, or at least a mathematical picture. But you're right. Yeah, we can throw balls around as much as we like, and there's a four-dimensional ball. Well, yeah, kind of, yes, but it's not using the time dimension as another orthogonal dimension in a picture.
Yeah, there's a lot of snickering on the side of the physicists against the mathematicians because the cliche is mathematicians are coming up with answers to or methods that will solve problems that don't exist yet, i.e., wasting our time. Even Feynman was known to snigger at the mathematicians for doing this, not
Yeah.
realizing, of course, they're using 50-year-old mathematical techniques, which to mathematicians are old, but the physicists are new, and that allows them to
Mm.
solve new problems. So, in topology, for example, that's the mathematical understanding of how to get there from here. You might think, well, that's pretty straightforward. Well, it can be, and it might not be. And
Mm.
so you had certain topological spaces that everyone was really sure there would be absolutely no use for. At the subatomic level, they're actually really useful.
Yeah, this is true. Um, uh, Again, we were very closely in the cosmology department, very closely aligned with the maths department. We uh, had seminars where we were together. In fact, when I first started my PhD, our department was still based in the maths building. We finally got shoved over to the physics building 2 years into my PhD, but we had a very close relationship with the pure maths. Well, yeah, the math, I'd say applied maths guys, the maths guys who are working in again in relativity, because you can't separate them. Physics and math, at this point you can't deal with it as separate entities. They
Right.
had to be someone in the maths department doing this work, and there had to be people in the physics department doing this work. It was just
Yeah.
everyone's doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. We would often joke that the applied mathematicians are about the same as the theoretical physicists because there is so much overlap.
I know it's funny. I'm not a theoretical physicist. I don't think I am anyway. I'm a phenomenologist. I marry wacky theories made by the theorists with observations. So, but we were definitely viewed more like the theorists. That's for sure.
We need the phenomenologists. We need someone to say this is what we're seeing in relation to these larger theories.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't just have the pie in the sky theories. You actually have to show how it fits with what's going on down here.
agreed. I think what we do is very important. What we did, what I did, and what they do is very important. Yes, phenomenologists, never underestimate them.
Definitely.
Right, we are an hour and 20 minutes into this. Unless you can think of something else, anything else you'd like to say?
Well, the kiosk said Star Trek Next Generation mentioned thought as a third aspect of space time. So maybe in reality, quantum information should be considered along with space time up to and including macrophysical abstract data as entropy. And I can't think of a better way to end this live stream than with that.
Mm. Well, I'm not going to argue with you there. I mean, I bow to your superior knowledge of how to end a live stream. So on that note, I will have to say thank you everyone for joining us. You have been, I don't know why, but you've been clinging on there in the chat, throwing us
You've
stuff.
been so generous to us. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I've been very poor at looking to my right and checking that there's been stuff in the chat. Thank you, old media guy, for checking it far more diligently than I do, it seems.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to be on, and it's a lot of fun.
I hope you can be here for next week.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Cool. I think you're freezing, Dr. Alex. You're freezing. You're roboting. Oh, he's roboting. I don't know if.
Oh, okay. Oh, I can see it. Yeah, it's doing weird things.
Your laptop is on its way out, dude.
All right, I'm going to close it now.
Okay.